The Arizona Territory, 1878, a land where fortunes were made and lost on the turn of a card, where a man's word was his bond and debts were paid in full, no matter the cost. For Eleanor Blackwood, her father's desperate wager would cost her everything she held dear. But in this harsh landscape, an unlikely alliance with a mysterious Apache scout would give her the strength to fight back against one of the most powerful men in the territory. This is a tale of betrayal, courage, and justice in the unforgiving American West. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The setting sun painted the mountains in hues of amber and crimson as Eleanor Blackwood guided her horse along the dusty trail toward home. At 22, she had grown accustomed to managing Blackwood Ranch almost single-handedly, while her father, Thomas, spent his days and nights in Copper Creek saloons. 5 years after her mother's death from typhoid fever, Eleanor had become the backbone of what remained of their once prosperous cattle operation. The small ranch house came into view as she created the final hill. Something was wrong. A black carriage with polished silver trim stood in the yard, the unmistakable conveyance of Victor Montgomery, the most powerful land baron in the Arizona Territory. Eleanor's stomach knotted. Montgomery owned the bank, the mines, and most of the businesses in Copper Creek. His visit could mean nothing good. She dismounted quickly, her boots barely touching the ground, before she was rushing toward the house. Voices echoed from inside, her father's pleading tone and Montgomery's cold, measured responses. Eleanor paused at the door, listening. "Please, Montgomery, just give me more time. The spring drive will bring enough to cover what I owe, with interest." "That arrangement might have been acceptable yesterday, Blackwood, but after last night's game, your debt has grown considerably. $5,000 is no small sum." Eleanor's blood ran cold. $5,000. It might as well have been $5 million. The ranch hadn't seen that kind of money in years. "I've taken inventory of your assets," Montgomery continued. "Your cattle herd is depleted. Your equipment is outdated. Even this land, while substantial in acreage, would require significant investment to be profitable again. However," his voice took on a calculated tone that made Eleanor's skin crawl, "I understand you have one asset of considerable value." "No," her father's voice cracked. "Not Eleanor. Anything but that." Eleanor pushed through the door. The scene before her confirmed her worst fears. Her father sat slumped at the kitchen table, a half-empty whiskey bottle beside him. Victor Montgomery stood by the window, impeccably dressed in a tailored black suit, his silver-streaked dark hair combed perfectly beneath his hat. At 45, Montgomery cut an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with cold grey eyes that assessed everything as property to be acquired. "Miss Blackwood." Montgomery turned, offering a thin smile that never reached his eyes. "We were just discussing your future." "My future is not yours to discuss, Mr. Montgomery," Eleanor replied, moving to stand beside her father. She placed a protective hand on his shoulder, feeling him trembling beneath her touch. "I'm afraid circumstances dictate otherwise." Montgomery withdrew a folded document from his jacket. "Your father has accumulated substantial debts at my establishments. Last night, he wagered the deed to this ranch in a desperate attempt to clear those debts. He lost." "You're lying," Eleanor whispered, though the defeated posture of her father told her otherwise. "I have witnesses, Miss Blackwood. Your father's signature is on this marker." Montgomery unfolded the paper, revealing her father's familiar scrawl at the bottom. "However, I'm a businessman, not a monster. I've proposed a solution that would allow you both to remain on this land." Thomas Blackwood looked up at his daughter, tears streaking his weathered face. "Ellie, I'm so sorry. I thought I could win it all back." "What solution?" Eleanor asked, her voice steady, despite the fear coursing through her. Montgomery's lips curved into what might have been a smile on another man. On him, it resembled a predator's assessment of wounded prey. "Marriage, Miss Blackwood. As my wife, you would want for nothing. Your father could live out his days here in comfort. The Blackwood name would remain connected to this land, if not its ownership." The room seemed to tilt beneath Eleanor's feet. "You can't be serious. You're old enough to be my father." "Age brings wisdom and stability, qualities your father clearly lacks." Montgomery's eyes hardened. "Consider the alternative. You have 1 week to vacate this property otherwise. Where will you go? Who will hire a rancher's daughter with no skills beyond tending cattle? Who will care for your father when he drowns himself in whiskey in some mining camp?" "Get out," Eleanor said, her voice low and dangerous. "Eleanor, please," her father began. "I said get out." She faced Montgomery squarely. "I need time to think." Montgomery retrieved his hat from the table. "You have until Sunday to provide your answer. I'll return after church services for your decision." He paused at the door. "Consider carefully, Miss Blackwood. My offer is more generous than you deserve." After Montgomery's carriage disappeared, down the road, Eleanor rounded on her father. "How could you? How could you gamble away everything Mother worked for?" Thomas Blackwood collapsed into tears. "I was winning at first, Ellie, winning big, enough to pay off everything and still have money to restock the herd. Then the cards turned." "They always turn," Eleanor said bitterly. "That's how men like Montgomery get rich, by waiting for men like you to believe in luck rather than honest work." She grabbed her father's whiskey bottle and hurled it against the wall, where it shattered, sending amber liquid streaming down the faded wallpaper. 5 years I've worked this ranch while you drank away Mother's memory. 5 years of dawn to dusk, managing what little we had left, and you threw it all away in a single night." Thomas sobbed into his hands. "What are we going to do?" "I don't." "No," Eleanor replied, her anger giving way to exhaustion. "But I won't marry Victor Montgomery. I'd rather die." The following morning, Eleanor rode to town, determination driving her forward. Sheriff Mitchell had known her mother well. Perhaps he could find some legal reason to invalidate her father's gambling debt. The main street of Copper Creek bustled with activity. Miners heading to their shifts, shopkeepers arranging displays, women gossiping outside the general store. As Eleanor tied her horse outside the sheriff's office, she noticed a commotion near the livery stable. A crowd had gathered, their voices raised in anger. Drawing closer, she saw the object of their hostility, a lone Apache man, his back against the stable wall, facing the mob with quiet dignity, despite the slurs and threats surrounding him. "We don't want your kind here, Injun," shouted a red-faced miner. "Go back to the reservation where you belong." "He works for the army as a scout," the livery owner protested, stepping between the Apache and the crowd. "Captain Reynolds sent him a message for the sheriff. Let him be." "Don't matter who he works for," another man called out. "Apache is Apache. My brother was killed by his people last year." Eleanor had heard enough. Moving through the crowd, she positioned herself beside the livery owner. "Is this how Copper Creek treats visitors now? Threatening a man who's done nothing wrong?" The crowd's attention shifted to her, murmurs spreading as they recognized the Blackwood daughter. The Apache man regarded her with surprised interest, his dark eyes assessing. "Mind your business, Miss Blackwood," advised an older woman. "These savages can't be trusted." "Neither can ignorant mobs," Eleanor retorted. "This man is here on official, army business. Would you have Captain Reynolds and his soldiers hear how you treated their scouts?" The mention of army retribution cooled the crowd's anger. Slowly, they dispersed, though many cast suspicious glances back at the Apache. When they were gone, the livery owner sighed with relief. "Thank you, Miss Blackwood. Things might have turned ugly." "They already were ugly," Eleanor replied. She turned to the Apache scout, who stood observing her with an unreadable expression. "Are you all right?" He nodded once. "I didn't need your help." His English was perfect with barely an accent. "But I appreciate the intention." "You're welcome," Eleanor said, extending her hand. "I'm Eleanor Blackwood." After a moment's hesitation, he took it. "Daniel Hawke." "Hawke is not an Apache name," Eleanor observed. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "My father was a white cavalry officer. My mother was Chiricahua. I carry both names, though neither side claims me fully." Daniel Hawke stood several inches taller than Eleanor, his frame lean but powerful. He wore a mixture of white and Apache clothing, canvas pants, a cotton shirt under a buckskin vest, and moccasins. Instead of boots, his black hair was cut shorter than traditional Apache style, but still reached his shoulders. A silver and turquoise pendant hung at his throat, its design intricate and beautiful. "I need to deliver my message to the sheriff," Hawke said, ending their brief connection. "Good day, Miss Blackwood." Eleanor watched him walk away, struck by the strange encounter. But she had her own business with Sheriff Mitchell. Putting the incident aside, she continued to the sheriff's office. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Inside, she found not only Sheriff Mitchell, but also Daniel Hawke and another man she recognized as Judge Wilson, who traveled the circuit handling legal matters for several territories. "Eleanor Blackwood," the sheriff greeted her. "What brings you to town today?" "I need legal advice," Eleanor began, glancing uncertainly at the others. "It's a private matter." Judge Wilson stood, gathering papers from the desk. "I was just leaving. Miss Blackwood, the sheriff and Mr. Hawke are discussing army matters." "Actually, Your Honor, perhaps you could help me," Eleanor said quickly. "It concerns a gambling debt and property rights." The judge paused, his interest piqued. "Montgomery's game?" Eleanor's eyes widened. "You know about it?" "Word travels fast in small towns," Sheriff Mitchell interjected, his expression grim. "Half. The county knows your father wagered the ranch." Heat rushed to Eleanor's cheeks. The humiliation of her father's actions being public knowledge was almost worse than the loss itself. "I'm sorry, Miss Blackwood," Judge Wilson said kindly, "but gambling debts, when properly witnessed and documented, are legally binding in this territory. If your father signed a marker, the property is forfeit." "But he was drunk," Eleanor protested. "Montgomery kept serving him whiskey throughout the game. Surely that invalidates the agreement." The judge shook his head. "Being intoxicated doesn't void a contract unless you can prove he was forcibly made to drink, or that the alcohol was tampered with in some way." "What about Montgomery's offer?" Sheriff Mitchell asked, his tone suggesting he already knew. Eleanor's jaw tightened. "To marry him, I'd rather lose the ranch." Daniel Hawke, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Montgomery has been systematically acquiring all the land around Copper Creek. Your ranch is one of the last independent properties between his holdings and the Western water rights." All three turned to look at him in surprise. "How would you know that?" Eleanor asked. "I observe. I listen. It's what keeps me alive." Hawke replied simply. "Montgomery has been pushing east from his main ranch for years. The army watches him because he's been known to hire men to harass Apache families who've been given permission to live off the reservation. He wants that land too." Judge Wilson sighed heavily. "Mr. Hawke is correct about Montgomery's land acquisitions, though I can't speak to his other allegations. Unfortunately, Miss Blackwood, I see no legal recourse for your situation. The debt is valid, and Montgomery has the right to claim your property." Eleanor felt the last of her hope slipping away. "So I either marry him or lose everything." "Those appear to be your options, legally speaking," the judge confirmed. "There is a third option," Daniel Hawke said quietly. All eyes turned to him again. "Pay the debt," he said. $5,000 would satisfy the marker, yes?" "Where would I get $5,000 in less than a week?" Eleanor asked bitterly. Hawke's expression remained impassive. There are ways. Sheriff Mitchell frowned. Don't go putting ideas in her head, Hawk. Nothing legal will get her that kind of money that quickly. I didn't say it would be easy, Hawk replied. He addressed Eleanor directly. Montgomery is not just cruel to Apaches. Many in town fear him, some hate him. You might find allies in unexpected places. The sheriff stood, effectively ending the conversation. That's enough wild talk. Miss Blackwood, I'm sorry about your predicament, but I advise you to consider Montgomery's offer carefully. As distasteful as it may be, it would secure your future. Eleanor thanked them for their time and left, her mind racing with desperate possibilities. Outside, she leaned against the sheriff's office wall, fighting back tears of frustration. She had no family to turn to, no friends wealthy enough to lend such a sum. Miss Blackwood. She looked up to find Daniel Hawk standing beside her, his approach so silent she hadn't heard him exit the building. What did you mean about finding allies? She asked. Walk with me, he suggested, nodding toward the edge of town. Against her better judgment, Eleanor fell into step beside him. They moved away from the bustle of the main street toward the quieter outskirts where the buildings gave way to scattered pines. Montgomery has enemies, Hawk said when they were alone. Not just Apaches. White settlers whose land he's taken. Mexican ranchers pushed off their grazing grounds. Chinese workers he's cheated out of mining claims. And how does that help me? Eleanor asked. Information is valuable, Hawk replied. Montgomery didn't become wealthy through honest means. He keeps records, proof of his dealings, both legal and illegal. Eleanor stopped walking. Are you suggesting I steal from him? I'm suggesting you take back what's yours by using his own methods against him. Hawk's dark eyes held hers steadily. There's a safe in his study. I've seen it when delivering messages from the army commander. Even if I wanted to do something so foolish, I wouldn't know how to open a safe, Eleanor protested. I would. Hawk's expression remained neutral, but there was a hint of something dangerous in his voice. My father taught me many things before he abandoned us. Some skills are useful in unexpected ways. Why would you help me? You don't know me. Hawk touched the turquoise pendant at his throat. My mother's family lost their ancestral lands to men like Montgomery. Some battles are worth fighting, even when they aren't your own. What you're suggesting is criminal, Eleanor said, though she couldn't deny the temptation his words offered. And what Montgomery did to your father wasn't. The game was rigged. Miss Blackwood, I've heard the dealers at Montgomery's saloon speak of how they signal him during high-stakes games. Your father never had a chance. Eleanor felt a surge of anger replace her despair. If what Hawk said was true, Montgomery had deliberately targeted her father, perhaps planning all along to force this marriage arrangement. I need time to think, she said finally. Hawk nodded. I'll be camped by Spring Creek for 2 more days before returning to Fort Bowie. Find me there if you decide to fight back. As he turned to leave, Eleanor called after him, Why risk yourself for a stranger? Hawk paused, looking back over his shoulder. Perhaps I'm tired of watching Montgomery take whatever he wants. Perhaps I believe some wrongs must be righted, no matter the cost. Then he was gone, disappearing among the trees with the silent grace of his Apache heritage. Eleanor stood alone at the edge of town, weighing impossible choices. Marry a man she despised, lose her home and her family's legacy, or risk everything on a dangerous plan with a man she barely knew. The sun was setting as she mounted her horse for the ride home, casting long shadows across the trail. Ahead lay Blackwood Ranch, her birthright and her prison. Behind her lay Copper Creek, where Victor Montgomery's influence touched everything like a creeping poison, and somewhere in between, camped by a creek named for renewal, waited Daniel Hawk with his impossible offer of hope. The choice, Eleanor realized as she urged her horse homeward, had already been made in her heart. She would not surrender to Montgomery without a fight. Come morning, she would find Daniel Hawke and begin planning how to reclaim what was rightfully hers, not just the land, but her future. The pale light of dawn was just breaking over the eastern ridge when Eleanor slipped out of the ranch house. Her father lay in alcohol-induced slumber, unaware of her departure or the decision she had made during the long, sleepless night. She left a note saying simply that she was visiting Martha Jenkins, a neighboring rancher's widow who occasionally hired Eleanor to help with household chores. Spring Creek lived up to its name, even in the late summer heat. Clear water bubbled over smooth stones, feeding the lush vegetation along its banks. Eleanor followed the waterway, scanning the terrain for any sign of Daniel Hawke's camp. A thin wisp of smoke rising through the trees finally caught her attention. She found him sitting cross-legged beside a small fire, so still he might have been carved from stone. His eyes were closed, but Eleanor knew he was aware of her presence. "You've decided," he said without opening his eyes. "Yes." Eleanor remained standing, her posture rigid with determination. "I want to hear your plan." Hawke's eyes opened, studying her with calm intensity. "Sit, eat first, then we talk." He gestured to a pot of something simmering over the fire. Eleanor hesitated, then sat across from him. He handed her a tin cup filled with a rich-smelling stew of rabbit and wild onions. The meal passed in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. There was something reassuring about Hawke's quiet confidence, so different from the boisterous men of Copper Creek. When they finished, Hawke set aside his cup and leaned forward. "Montgomery hosts a gathering at his estate every month. The next one is tomorrow night." "I know of these parties," Eleanor nodded. "The wealthy ranchers, mine owners, and politicians. My father was invited once, years ago, when our ranch was still prosperous. Montgomery keeps his most valuable documents in a safe behind a painting in his study," Hawke continued. "During these gatherings, the study is locked, but the servants have keys." "How do you know this?" Eleanor asked, suspicious. A fleeting smile crossed Hawke's face. "Like I said, I observe. I've delivered messages to Montgomery's estate several times. The army commander uses me for sensitive communications because I can move unseen when necessary." He paused. "And because Montgomery underestimates me seeing only an Apache, not a threat. So what exactly are we looking for in this safe? Evidence of Montgomery's manipulations? Proof that the game was rigged?" Hawke's expression hardened. "Or something else we can use against him? A man like Montgomery doesn't build an empire without creating enemies and keeping secrets." Eleanor frowned. "Even if we find something, what good would it do? The judge already said the gambling debt is legal." "Some leverage is more powerful than legal documents," Hawke replied. "Montgomery values his reputation among the territorial elite. The right information could persuade him to forgive your father's debt rather than face exposure." "Blackmail," Eleanor said flatly. "Justice," Hawke corrected, "by whatever means necessary." Eleanor stared into the fire, weighing his words. What he proposed crossed lines she had never imagined herself crossing. Yet Montgomery had taken everything from her family through manipulation and deceit. Perhaps fighting fire with fire was the only option left. "How would we even get inside?" she asked finally. "I can hardly walk up to his front door." "You'll be invited," Hawke said simply. As Martha Jenkins's niece, newly arrived from Boston, Eleanor's eyebrows shot up. "Martha would never agree to such a deception." "She already has." Hawke reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a sealed envelope. "I visited her yesterday. She holds no love for Montgomery after he foreclosed on her late husband's mine. She's willing to help, especially when I explained what happened to your father." Eleanor took the envelope, breaking the seal to find an elegant invitation to Victor Montgomery's monthly soiree, addressed to Miss Catherine Jenkins of Boston. "This is unexpected," she admitted, struggling to process how quickly Hawke had Set things in motion. Mrs. Jenkins has also provided suitable attire, Hawk added. You'll need to look the part of an Eastern lady. And what about you? How will you enter? Through means less conventional than the front door, Hawk replied cryptically. I'll meet you in Montgomery's study at exactly 9:30. The guests will be gathered in the ballroom for his customary speech by then. The plan was audacious, possibly foolhardy. Yet as Eleanor rode back to the ranch, the invitation tucked safely in her pocket, she felt something she hadn't felt in days: hope. The following evening, Martha Jenkins fussed over Eleanor like a mother hen, adjusting the borrowed dress of deep blue silk and arranging her hair in an elaborate style favored by Eastern socialites. Remember, you're my sister, Rebecca's girl, Martha reminded her for the third time. You've come west to recover from a broken engagement to a Boston banker. Catherine Jenkins, heartbroken but resilient, Eleanor repeated, barely recognizing her reflection in Martha's mirror. The transformation was remarkable. Gone was the sunburned rancher's daughter, replaced by a sophisticated young woman who looked as though she'd never saddled a horse or mended a fence in her life. Montgomery has never met Rebecca, so he won't. Question the connection, Martha continued, securing a borrowed pearl necklace around Eleanor's throat. Just be careful not to speak too knowledgeably about local matters. You're supposed to be new to the territory. Eleanor nodded, her stomach twisting with nerves. I still can't believe you agreed to this plan. Martha's kind face hardened momentarily. Montgomery ruined my Harold with his schemes, claimed the mine was worthless, foreclosed on our loan, then reopened it himself 6 months later when they hit a rich silver vein. She patted Eleanor's shoulder. I'd risk more than a social lie to see that man get what's coming to him. The Montgomery estate stood on a hill overlooking Copper Creek, its white columns and wrap-around porches more suited to Georgia plantations than Arizona territory. Gas lamps illuminated the sweeping drive where carriages deposited finely dressed guests. As Eleanor ascended the broad steps on the arm of Martha's son William, who was in on the deception, she fought to control her racing heart. If Montgomery recognized her beneath the fine clothes and elaborate hairstyle, all would be lost. Servant announced them at the door. Mrs. Martha Jenkins, Mr. William Jenkins, and Miss Catherine Jenkins of Boston. Eleanor kept her eyes appropriately downcast as they passed through the receiving line, offering only a murmured greeting and her gloved hand when introduced to Montgomery. Miss Jenkins, Montgomery said, holding her hand perhaps a moment too long. A pleasure to welcome new blood to our little society. I look forward to making your acquaintance later this evening. Eleanor curtsied slightly, relieved when they moved on to the crowded ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the assembled territorial elite, cattle barons, mining magnates, politicians, and their bejeweled wives. A small orchestra played in one corner, while servants circulated with champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. 9 o'clock, William whispered, consulting his pocket watch. You have half an hour before you need to slip away. Eleanor nodded, scanning the room. She recognized many faces, people who had once greeted her father warmly in town, now moving in Montgomery's exalted circles. How many of them knew what had happened at the Blackwood Ranch? How many cared? Miss Jenkins, a smooth voice interrupted her thoughts. Eleanor turned to find Montgomery at her elbow, offering a glass of champagne. I hope you're enjoying our little gathering. It's lovely, Eleanor replied, adopting the slight accent Martha had coached her on. So different from Boston's affairs, yet charming in its frontier elegance. Montgomery laughed appreciatively. We do our best to bring civilization to these wild lands. Tell me, what brings you to visit your aunt in such a remote corner of the world? A change of scenery, Eleanor said, sipping her champagne to hide her nervousness. Boston holds difficult memories at present. Ah, the universal remedy for a broken heart. Distance. Montgomery's grey eyes assessed her with new interest. The gentleman's loss is our considerable gain. Perhaps Arizona will offer new prospects to replace those left behind. The implication was clear in his predatory smile. Eleanor suppressed a shudder, reminded of his similar approach to her just days ago. Did he pursue every unattached young woman who crossed his path? "You're very kind, Mr. Montgomery," she replied non-committally, "though I confess I'm not yet seeking new attachments." "Time heals all wounds, my dear." Montgomery checked his own gold timepiece. "If you'll excuse me, I must greet the territorial governor. Please enjoy yourself. Perhaps we can continue our conversation after my address to the guests." When he moved away, Eleanor released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. William appeared at her side, offering his arm. "It's nearly time," he murmured. "I'll create a distraction when Montgomery begins his speech." The servants' passage is behind the blue curtain in the east hallway, just as Hawke described. At precisely 9:15, Montgomery tapped his champagne glass for attention. As the room quieted and all eyes turned to their host, William deliberately bumped into a servant carrying a tray of glasses. The resulting crash provided the perfect cover for Eleanor to slip from the ballroom unnoticed. The east hallway was dimly lit and deserted. Eleanor located the blue curtain, glancing quickly around before ducking behind it to find a narrow servant's passage. She gathered her skirts, moving as quickly and quietly as possible through the passageway until she reached a door marked "Study Private." Producing the iron key Martha had sourced from one of Montgomery's former housemaids, Eleanor unlocked the door with trembling hands. The study beyond was dark, illuminated only by moonlight filtering through tall windows. She closed the door behind her, taking a moment to let her eyes adjust to the gloom. The room was a testament to Montgomery's wealth and self-importance. Heavy mahogany furniture, leather-bound books, mounted heads of deer and elk, and a massive desk dominated the space. On the wall behind the desk hung a large painting of Montgomery on horseback, surveying his domain like a feudal lord. "You're 3 minutes early," Eleanor nearly screamed as a shadow detached itself from behind a curtain, materializing into Daniel Hawke. He wore dark clothing and had smeared something on his face to dull the reflection of his skin in the moonlight. "How did you get in?" she whispered. "Kitchen window. The cook leaves it unlatched to cool the room at night." Hawke moved to the painting, carefully lifting it away from the wall to reveal a wall safe behind it. "Keep watch at the door while I work." Eleanor positioned herself where she could see through the keyhole into the hallway beyond, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it could be heard throughout the house. Behind her, she could hear Hawke working at the safe, the gentle clicks and scrapes of metal on metal. Minutes stretched like hours. From the ballroom came the muffled sound of applause. Montgomery's speech had ended. Soon guests would be mingling again, perhaps some wandering the house. "Hurry," she urged. "Almost there," Hawke murmured. A final click, slightly louder than the others, and then, "Got it!" Eleanor abandoned her post to join him as he swung the safe door open. Inside were stacks of documents, bundles of cash, and several small boxes that likely contained valuables. "What exactly are we looking for?" she asked, as Hawke began rapidly examining papers. "Anything with your father's name?" "Correspondence about land acquisitions, evidence of fraud." Hawke handed her a stack of documents. "Check these while I go through the rest." Eleanor scanned the papers quickly, finding deeds, contracts, and letters from various officials in Tucson. Then, in a leather portfolio marked "Acquisitions Pending," she discovered something that made her blood run cold. "Hawke," she whispered, "look at this." The document was a survey map of the region, with properties marked and annotated in Montgomery's neat handwriting. The Blackwood Ranch was circled in red ink, with notations about water rights and access to the Southern Valley. Next to it was written, "Critical Acquisition. secure by any means necessary. Below the map was a letter from Montgomery to someone named Davies, instructing him to ensure Blackwood continues his losing streak and to increase the whiskey portions during the high-stakes game. The letter was dated 3 weeks before her father's disastrous night of gambling. He planned this, Eleanor said, fury building inside her. He deliberately targeted my father. Hawke nodded grimly. Keep looking. We need more. They continued their search, finding additional evidence of Montgomery's schemes, bribes to officials, threats to competitors, and manipulation of land values. But it was a small black ledger hidden at the back of the safe that proved most. Damning! This is it, Hawke said, flipping through pages of transactions. He's been selling army weapons to renegade bands and then collecting bounties when he informs on their locations. Captain Reynolds has been hunting this leak for months. Footsteps in the hallway froze them both. A voice, Montgomery's, approached the study door, accompanied by another man's deeper tones. "Just a moment, Governor. I have the maps in my study," Montgomery was saying as a key scraped in the lock. Hawke reacted instantly, shoving the ledger and the letter about Thomas Blackwood into Eleanor's hands. "The window!" he whispered urgently, nodding toward the tall French doors that led to a balcony. "Now!" They barely had time to close the safe and replace the painting before the study door began to open. Eleanor gathered her skirts and slipped through the French doors, Hawke right behind her. They pressed themselves against the stone balustrade. As light flooded the study, "Make your way down the trellis," Hawke instructed in a barely audible whisper. "Meet me at the edge of the orchard." Eleanor looked over the balcony edge, seeing the rose trellis Hawke indicated. It was a good 15-foot drop to the ground, with only the wooden lattice for support. "I can't possibly climb down in this dress," she protested softly. "You can and you will," Hawke replied, already helping her over the railing. "Unless you prefer to explain to Montgomery why Miss Catherine Jenkins was rifling through his safe." Inside the study, Montgomery and the governor were examining something on the desk, their backs to the French doors. It was now or never. Eleanor tucked the stolen documents into her bodice, gathered her skirts in one hand, and began the precarious descent. The trellis creaked alarmingly under her weight. Thorns from the climbing roses tore at her borrowed dress and scratched her hands. But Eleanor kept moving downward, one careful step at a time. Above her, Hawke waited until she was halfway down before beginning his own descent, moving with the silent agility that made him such an effective scout. Eleanor's foot slipped on the fourth rung from the bottom, sending her tumbling the remaining. Distance to land hard on her back, the breath knocked from her lungs. For a terrible moment, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, certain that Montgomery would hear and investigate. Then Hawke was beside her, helping her to her feet, supporting her as they stumbled away from the house toward the shadows of Montgomery's prized apple orchard. Only when they were safely concealed among the trees did Eleanor allow herself to gasp for air. "Did we get enough?" she panted, wincing at the pain in her ribs from the fall. Hawke took the documents from her, quickly examining them in the faint moonlight filtering through the branches. "More than enough. The weapons trafficking alone would see him imprisoned. The evidence of rigging the game against your father is clear. And there's something else, a deed transfer for land that belongs to the San Carlos Apache. Land that was guaranteed by treaty." He looked up at Eleanor, his dark eyes intense in the shadows. "We have him." The sound of voices raised in alarm came from the direction of the house. Lights appeared in windows. Montgomery had discovered the break-in. "We need to move," Hawke said urgently, taking Eleanor's arm. "Can you run?" Eleanor gathered the torn remnants of Martha's beautiful dress, ignoring the pain in her side. "Lead the way!" They fled through the orchard toward the edge of Montgomery's property, where William waited with horses. As they mounted and galloped into the night, Eleanor clutched the evidence of Montgomery's crimes against her heart. For the first time in days, she felt something other than despair. They had a chance now, not just to save the ranch, but to bring Montgomery to justice for all his crimes. The fight was far from over, but the balance of power had shifted. Eleanor Blackwood was no longer simply Montgomery's victim. She was his reckoning. Dawn was breaking as Eleanor, Hawk, and William reached Martha Jenkins' small ranch. The night's escape had been frantic, alternating between hard gallops and cautious detours through dry creek beds to disguise their trail. Montgomery would not take the violation of his private sanctuary lightly. Martha gasped when she saw Eleanor's torn dress and scratched hands. "My word, child, what happened to you?" "Success happened," Eleanor replied, exhaustion evident in her voice as she sank into a chair at Martha's kitchen table, and a rather ungraceful descent down a rose trellis. William stabled the horses while Hawk spread their stolen documents across the table. Martha provided coffee and bandages for Eleanor's cuts, her weathered face growing grimmer as she reviewed the evidence of Montgomery's misdeeds. "The weapons trafficking will interest Captain Reynolds most," Hawk said, organizing the papers into categories. "The evidence about the rigged gambling and deliberate targeting of your father is our leverage for the ranch." "What about the treaty violations?" Eleanor asked, wincing as Martha applied iodine to a particularly deep scratch. Hawk's expression darkened. "Those I will take to the tribal council, but Montgomery has powerful friends in Washington. I doubt they'll hold him accountable for stealing Apache land." Martha snorted. "He'll pay for something, though. These documents prove he's been playing everyone for fools. The army, the governor, the banks." "The question is how to use this information effectively," William noted, joining them at the table. "Montgomery will know his safe was breached. He'll be preparing for whatever comes next." Eleanor rubbed her temples, fighting exhaustion. "I should return home. My father will be worried sick by now." "Too dangerous," Hawk said firmly. "Montgomery's men will be watching the Blackwood Ranch. My guess is they're already searching for Catherine Jenkins as well." Martha nodded in agreement. "You'll stay here for now, Eleanor. I'll send word to your father that you're safe." "But Sunday is tomorrow," Eleanor protested. "Montgomery expects my answer about the marriage proposal. If you're not there, he'll know something is amiss," Hawk finished for her, "which is why we need to move quickly." Today, they formulated their plan over breakfast. Hawk would take the weapons trafficking evidence to Captain Reynolds at Fort Bowie immediately. Meanwhile, William would deliver a message to Sheriff Mitchell in Copper Creek requesting a meeting at the Jenkins Ranch that afternoon, bringing Judge Wilson, if possible. "And what about me?" Eleanor asked. "I can't just hide here while others fight my battles. You'll prepare to confront Montgomery," Hawk replied. "When the sheriff arrives, you'll present the evidence about your father's gambling debt. With the judge's witness, we'll have official documentation of Montgomery's fraud." "You make it sound so simple," Eleanor said skeptically. Hawk's expression remained serious. "There's nothing simple about challenging a man like Montgomery. He won't surrender without a fight." The group dispersed to their assigned tasks. While Martha helped Eleanor clean up and change into borrowed clothing, Hawk and William set out on their respective missions. The waiting was excruciating. Eleanor paced the small ranch house, rehearsing what she would say when faced with the officials, reviewing the documents until she knew every damning detail by heart. By mid-afternoon, William returned with Sheriff Mitchell and Judge Wilson in tow. The sheriff looked uncomfortable, tugging at his collar as he settled at Martha's kitchen table. "This better be important, Miss Blackwood," he grumbled. "I left a jail full of Saturday drunks to come out here." Eleanor spread the documents before them. "Victor Montgomery deliberately targeted my father. He instructed his dealer to ensure my father lost at cards after playing him with alcohol. It was a calculated scheme to acquire our land." Judge Wilson examined the papers with growing concern. These appear authentic. Montgomery's handwriting is distinctive. He looked up at Eleanor sharply. How did you obtain these documents, young lady? Does it matter? Eleanor countered. They prove the game was rigged. Doesn't that invalidate my father's debt? The sheriff and judge exchanged glances. Stolen evidence is inadmissible in court, Sheriff Mitchell stated flatly. We're not in court yet, Eleanor argued. We're seeking justice without public scandal. Surely that would be in everyone's best interest, including Montgomery's. Judge Wilson stroked his beard thoughtfully. You're proposing a private settlement? Using these documents as leverage? Exactly, Eleanor confirmed. All I want is for Montgomery to tear up my father's marker and leave us in peace. Blackmail, in other words, the sheriff said disapprovingly. Justice, Eleanor corrected, echoing Hawke's earlier words. Montgomery built his fortune on fraud and intimidation. I'm simply using his methods against him. Before the officials could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Martha peered out the window, her expression tightening. Montgomery, she announced grimly, and he's brought company. Eleanor moved to the window. Victor Montgomery sat astride his black stallion, flanked by 4 armed men. Their expressions left no doubt about their intentions. I believe Miss Jenkins is a guest in your home, Mrs. Jenkins, Montgomery called out, his voice carrying clearly through the afternoon air. I'd like a word with her regarding some property she removed from my estate last night. Sheriff Mitchell joined Eleanor at the window, cursing under his breath. How did he know you were here? Doesn't matter now, Eleanor replied, a cold determination settling over her. Let him in. It's time to end this. Martha opened the door as Montgomery dismounted and approached the house alone, leaving his men with the horses. He entered the ranch house with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way, removing his hat in a mockery of politeness. His eyes narrowed when he saw Eleanor, the sheriff, and the judge gathered around the table with the incriminating documents clearly visible. Miss Blackwood, he said coldly, dropping all pretense, I must commend your theatrical talents. Catherine Jenkins was quite convincing. Not convincing. Enough, apparently, Eleanor replied. Please join us, Mr. Montgomery. We were just discussing your creative approach to acquiring land. Montgomery's gaze flicked to the documents, his expression hardening. Breaking and entering, theft, impersonation. Quite a list of crimes for a rancher's daughter. I wonder what your father would think of his little girl becoming a common criminal. I wonder what the territorial governor would think of his friend supplying weapons to hostile Apache bands, Eleanor countered, or what the army would say about your bounty hunting scheme. A flash of genuine fear crossed Montgomery's face before he controlled his expression. Absurd allegations. You have no proof. Actually, Sheriff Mitchell interjected, these documents appear quite damning, Montgomery, especially this letter instructing your dealer to ensure Thomas Blackwood lost at cards. Montgomery sneered. Obvious forgeries. And even if they weren't, as you've already noted, the sheriff, stolen evidence is inadmissible in court. We're not in court, Judge Wilson said mildly. We're having a private discussion about potentially embarrassing matters that could damage reputations if made public. Understanding dawned in Montgomery's cold eyes. I see. This is an extortion attempt. This is an opportunity, Eleanor corrected. Him. Tear up my father's gambling marker, renounce all claims to Blackwood Ranch, and these documents never see the light of day. Montgomery's laugh held no humor. You naive child. Do you really think I'd surrender to such amateur threats? I have friends in the territorial capital, connections in Washington. A few questionable documents won't. The door opened, cutting off Montgomery's boast. Captain Reynolds of the U.S. Army entered, followed by Daniel Hawke and 2 uniformed soldiers. Victor Montgomery, the captain said formally, I need to speak with you regarding some very disturbing allegations. Montgomery's face was drained of color. Reynolds, what brings the army to this social gathering? Captain Reynolds placed a leather folio on the table, the ledger detailing Montgomery's weapons trafficking operation. Mr. Hawke has brought some concerning information to my attention. Information that, if verified, constitutes treason against the United States. Treason? Montgomery sputtered. That's preposterous. You can't possibly take the word of an Apache half-breed over a respected businessman. I take evidence over rhetoric, Mr. Montgomery, Reynolds replied coolly, and the evidence is compelling. Montgomery's composure cracked. This is a conspiracy. The Apache want my land. Blackwood wants revenge for his own gambling failures. They've fabricated these documents to destroy me. Eleanor met Montgomery's furious gaze calmly. We both know these documents are genuine. Just as we both know you deliberately targeted my father to acquire our water rights. For a long moment, tension filled the small ranch house. Then Montgomery straightened his shoulders, his businessman's mind clearly calculating odds and outcomes. What exactly do you want? He asked Eleanor, his voice tight with suppressed rage. As I said, tear up my father's marker, renounce all claims to Blackwood Ranch, and leave us in peace. Montgomery's gaze shifted between the army captain, the sheriff, the judge, and finally back to Eleanor. And the weapons allegations? That's between you and Captain Reynolds, Eleanor replied. My concern is my family's land. Judge Wilson cleared his throat. I could prepare a formal document renouncing all claims to the Blackwood property, in exchange for Miss Blackwood surrendering any evidence related to gambling improprieties. And the Apache land claims? Hawke spoke up for the first time since entering. Montgomery's jaw tightened. Those purchases were legal. I have deeds signed by reservation officials. Officials who were not authorized to sell treaty-protected land, Hawke countered. Captain Reynolds intervened. One issue at a time, Mr. Hawke. Let's resolve the Blackwood situation first. Eleanor could see Hawke's frustration, but he nodded once in acceptance. Some justice was better than none, and the weapons trafficking charges would keep Montgomery occupied for months, perhaps years. Judge Wilson produced paper and pen from his case. Shall we proceed with the agreement, Mr. Montgomery? With visible reluctance, Montgomery sat at the table. For the next hour, legal language was drafted, reviewed, and finalized. The document stated that Thomas Blackwood's gambling debt was forgiven in full. All claims to Blackwood Ranch were permanently renounced, and in exchange, Eleanor Blackwood would surrender certain disputed documents regarding gambling activities. When the document was complete, both parties signed, with Sheriff Mitchell, Judge Wilson, and Captain Reynolds serving as witnesses. This doesn't end here, Montgomery said quietly to Eleanor as they concluded. You've made a powerful enemy today, and you've lost a valuable property, Eleanor replied evenly. Consider which of us came out ahead, Mr. Montgomery. As Montgomery prepared to leave, Captain Reynolds stepped forward. I'll need you to accompany me to Fort Bowie for further questioning about these weapons. Allegations. My lawyer will meet us there, Montgomery snapped, his normally impeccable composure shattered. This persecution will not stand. Eleanor watched from the porch as Montgomery was escorted to Fort Bowie by Captain Reynolds and his soldiers. Biasa, Landbaron's remaining men, followed at a distance, casting hostile glances back at the ranch house. He'll fight the weapons charges, Hawke said, joining Eleanor on the porch. With his connections, he may even escape serious consequences. But he won't get our ranch, Eleanor replied, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders as she held the signed agreement. My father is safe now. For how long? Hawke asked pragmatically. Montgomery spoke true about one thing. He's a dangerous enemy to make. Eleanor turned to face him. Then we'll need to be prepared. Montgomery isn't the only one with friends and allies. Hawke studied her for a long moment, something like respect flickering in his dark eyes. You've changed since we met, Eleanor Blackwood. "Necessity changes us all," she replied. "Thank you for what you did. I couldn't have saved the ranch without your help." "I had my own reasons for opposing Montgomery," Hawk reminded her. "The Apache land claims remain unresolved," Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps that's our next battle, then." "Our?" Hawk raised an eyebrow. "You helped me. I'll help you." Eleanor extended her hand formally. "Partners?" After a moment's hesitation, Hawk clasped her hand. "Partners." The afternoon sun cast long shadows as Eleanor finally returned to Blackwood Ranch, the precious legal document secured inside her jacket. William Jenkins had insisted on escorting her, concerned that Montgomery's men might still pose a threat despite their employer's detention. She found her father on the porch, bleary-eyed but sober for the first time in days. When he saw her approaching, he rose unsteadily to his feet. "Eleanor, where have you been? I've been out of my mind with worry. Martha's note only said you were safe, not where you'd gone or when you'd return." Eleanor dismounted, feeling the aches of the previous night's adventure in every muscle. "It's a long story, Father, but the important part is this." She handed him the legal document. "Read it." Thomas Blackwood unfolded the paper with trembling hands, his bloodshot eyes widening as he absorbed its contents. "This can't be real. Montgomery would never simply forgive the debt." "It wasn't simple," Eleanor admitted, "and it wasn't forgiveness, but it is legally binding." Her father looked up, truly seeing her for perhaps the first time in years. The cuts on her hands, the bruise forming on her cheek from the fall down the trellis, the determination in her eyes. "What did you do, Ellie?" he whispered, fear and awe mingling in his voice. "What was necessary?" she replied simply. "The ranch is safe now. Our home is secure." Thomas Blackwood's eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve this. I don't deserve you." "No," Eleanor agreed, the words sharp with years of pent-up hurt. Then her voice softened. "But you're my father. And this is our land. Together we're going to rebuild what was lost." She turned to gaze out over the Blackwood Ranch, the weathered buildings, the depleted pastures, the distant mountains that had watched over generations of her family. The challenges ahead were daunting, but for the first time in years, hope seemed possible. A movement at the edge of her vision caught her attention. Daniel Hawk sat mounted on his pinto horse at the distant ridgeline, watching over her return home. When he saw her notice him, he raised a hand in silent salute before turning his horse toward the wilderness. Eleanor returned the gesture, knowing this wasn't goodbye. Montgomery's threat still loomed, and the Apache land claims remained unresolved. New battles awaited them both, but today she has won back her freedom and her family legacy. Today, that was enough. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the Arizona sky in fierce oranges and purples, Eleanor Blackwood stepped into her home, not as a desperate daughter facing impossible choices, but as a woman who had discovered her own strength and the power of unexpected alliances. The story of the rancher's daughter and the Apache scout was just beginning. 2 weeks after Montgomery's downfall, Blackwood Ranch was showing subtle signs of recovery. Eleanor had used the respite to assess their situation realistically. The cattle herd numbered barely 50 head, down from the hundreds that had once grazed their lands. Fences needed mending, the barn roof leaked, and their finances remained precarious. But Thomas Blackwood had changed. The shock of nearly losing everything had accomplished what years of Eleanor's pleading could not. He hadn't touched a drop of alcohol since her return, and though his hands trembled with withdrawal, he worked from sunrise to sunset alongside his daughter. They were repairing the north pasture fence when a dust cloud on the horizon announced a visitor. Eleanor shaded her eyes, recognizing Daniel Hawk's distinctive silhouette as he approached. "News from town?" she called as he dismounted. Hawk nodded, removing his hat. "Montgomery was released yesterday." Eleanor's stomach dropped. Released? What about the weapon charges? Insufficient evidence, Hawke replied, his voice flat with suppressed anger. The ledger wasn't enough without corroborating testimony. His contacts in Washington applied pressure. Captain Reynolds was ordered to release him pending further investigation. Thomas drove the last fence post into the ground with unnecessary force. That snake always slithers free. What about our agreement? Eleanor asked. The document renouncing his claim to our ranch? Still binding, Hawke assured her. Judge Wilson confirmed it. Montgomery can't touch Blackwood Ranch without breaking the law outright. Eleanor wiped sweat from her brow, considering the implications. He won't come at us directly then. He'll find another way to retaliate. Which is why I'm here, Hawke said. Montgomery's first act as a free man was to file a formal complaint with the Indian agent. He's demanding the immediate removal of squatters from his legally purchased land near San Carlos. The Apache families, Eleanor realized. The ones living on treaty-protected land. Hawke's jaw tightened. 7 families, nearly 30 people, including elders and children. They've been given 1 week to vacate before the army is authorized to remove them. Thomas swore under his breath. Can't the tribal council intervene? They've tried, Hawke replied, but the Indian agent claims the land sales were properly documented. The treaties mean nothing to him. Eleanor studied Hawke's face, seeing the strain beneath his controlled exterior. What can we do? We need to prove the land sales were fraudulent, Hawke said. The tribal council believes that Montgomery bribed reservation officials to forge signatures on the deeds. Would Judge Wilson help? Thomas suggested. He seemed sympathetic to our cause. Hawke shook his head. Wilson's authority doesn't extend to reservation matters. We need evidence that would convince the Indian commissioner in Tucson to intervene. Eleanor leaned against the newly repaired fence, thinking hard. What kind of evidence? The original deeds show different boundaries, proof of bribery, witness testimony from tribal elders confirming the land was never sold. Hawke spread his hands. Any of these would help, but they're not easy to come by. Thomas scratched his chin thoughtfully. I recall something from years back. When the San Carlos boundary was established, every rancher in the territory received official maps. I believe I still have mine in the old trunk. Eleanor and Hawke exchanged glances of cautious hope. Those maps would show the legally recognized boundaries, Eleanor said. If Montgomery's purchased land falls within them, it would prove he's claiming territory that was never authorized for sale, Hawke finished. Let's see this map. The trunk in question was buried beneath years of accumulated items in the ranch house attic. It took an hour of dusty searching before Thomas triumphantly produced a yellow document tube. Here it is, the official territorial survey of 1868. They cleared the kitchen table and carefully unrolled the brittle paper. The map showed the original reservation boundaries, stamped and signed by both Army officials and Apache representatives. Hawke studied it intently, his finger tracing the boundary lines. This matches what the elders have always claimed. The disputed land is clearly within the reservation, but will it be enough? Eleanor questioned. Montgomery could argue that subsequent agreements modified these boundaries. Not without proper authorization from Washington, Thomas pointed out. Any boundary changes would require a new treaty, ratified by Congress. Hawke's eyes narrowed in thought. There's someone who might know if such treaties exist. Benjamin Foster, the former Indian agent before Montgomery's man took over. He was forced out for being too sympathetic to Apache concerns, but he kept meticulous records. Where is he now? Eleanor asked. Last I heard he was living in Tucson, opened a small law practice specializing in land disputes. Eleanor exchanged a quick look with her father, who nodded his approval. Then we're going to Tucson. The journey to Tucson took 3 days of hard riding. Eleanor found herself grateful for Hawk's presence as they traversed territories known for bandits and hostile encounters. His knowledge of hidden water sources and safe camping locations proved invaluable. On the second night, as they sat beside a small fire in a sheltered canyon, Eleanor finally asked the question that had been on her mind since they'd met. "Why did you choose to help me that day in town? You could have walked away after delivering your message." Hawk was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. "I recognized something in you," he finally said. "The same determination I saw in my mother when the reservation system began. The refusal to surrender what rightfully belongs to you." "Tell me about her," Eleanor said softly. Hawk rarely spoke of personal matters, but tonight, under the vast Arizona sky, he seemed to drop his guard slightly. She was Chiricahua, from the band led by Cochise before the reservations, proud, skilled in traditional ways. "My father was a young lieutenant assigned to treaty negotiations." A faint smile crossed his face. She said he was the only white man who looked her in the eyes when speaking, instead of over her head. They married. In both traditions, the army didn't approve, but my father was stubborn. For 8 years, we lived in a strange middle world. Not fully accepted by either side, but together. The smile faded. When I was 10, he received orders transferring him to Washington. His commanding officer made it clear that his Indian family would damage his career if we accompanied him. "He left you behind," Eleanor surmised. Hawk nodded once, his expression unreadable. "He promised to send for us when he established himself. Perhaps he meant it. My mother refused to believe otherwise, even when years passed with no word." "What happened to her?" "Influenza swept through San Carlos when I was 16. She was among the first to fall ill." His voice remained steady, but Eleanor saw the pain in his eyes. "Before she died, she made me promise to protect our ancestral lands, no matter the cost." Eleanor stared into the fire, understanding dawning. "That's why Montgomery's land grab matters so much to you. It's not just about the 7 families. "It's about keeping my word," Hawk confirmed quietly. "About honoring her memory in the only way I can." The conversation gave Eleanor a new appreciation for her companion. Beneath his composed exterior lay a depth of feeling and purpose that matched her own determination. They were more alike than different. Despite their contrasting backgrounds, Tucson bustled with activity compared to sleepy Copper Creek. Adobe buildings lined the streets, their warm earth tones glowing in the afternoon sun. Mexican, Anglo, and indigenous residents moved through the plazas and marketplaces in a vibrant blend of cultures. They found Benjamin Foster's law office on a side street near the courthouse, a modest establishment with a weather-beaten sign. The man himself matched his surroundings, gray-haired, spectacled, with the weathered complexion of someone who had spent decades under the Arizona sun. His eyebrows rose in recognition when Hawk entered. "Daniel Hawk. It's been, 2 years?" "Nearly 3, Mr. Foster." Hawk shook the older man's hand. "This is Miss Eleanor Blackwood from Copper Creek. We need your expertise on reservation boundaries." Foster gestured for them to sit, his expression turning serious as they explained the situation with Montgomery and the threatened Apache families. "Montgomery," Foster muttered, shaking his head. "That man has been manipulating reservation boundaries since he arrived in the territory. I fought his development plans for years before they replaced me with that yes-man Collins." "We have the original boundary maps," Eleanor said, producing the document tube. "But we need to know if any legal modifications exist that would support Montgomery's claims." Foster examined their map carefully, comparing it to his own records. After nearly an hour of searching through dusty files and legal texts, he looked up with a grim smile. There were two proposed boundary adjustments in 1874 and 1876. Both were drafted by territorial officials under pressure from mining and ranching interests. Both were sent to Washington. He removed his spectacles, cleaning them deliberately, and both were rejected by the Department of the Interior as violations of existing treaties. Eleanor exchanged a triumphant glance with Hawke. So the original boundaries remain legally binding? Absolutely. Any land sales within those boundaries are invalid without proper congressional authorization. Foster replaced his spectacles. Montgomery knows this. He's counting on no one challenging him with the actual documentation. Will you provide a legal opinion confirming this? Hawke asked. Something we can present to the current Indian agent? Foster's eyes hardened with purpose. I'll do better than that. I'll accompany you to San Carlos myself. Collins was my assistant for 3 years. He might ignore you, but he'll find it harder to dismiss me. With Foster's help, they prepared a formal petition to halt the evictions, gathering additional documentation from territorial archives. By the time they departed Tucson, they had assembled a compelling legal case against Montgomery's land claims. The journey to San Carlos took them through increasingly arid landscapes, the desert scrub giving way to occasional stands of juniper and pine as they gained elevation. Eleanor had never visited an Apache reservation before, and the reality was sobering. The agency buildings were well constructed, but the Apache dwellings revealed the harsh conditions imposed on the once nomadic people. Canvas tents and crude shelters housed families who had historically ranged freely across vast territories. Indian Agent Collins received them with obvious reluctance in his office, his pinched expression suggesting he viewed their arrival as an unwelcome interruption. "Mr. Foster," he acknowledged stiffly, "I wasn't aware you were still involved in reservation affairs." "Injustice keeps me involved, Collins," Foster replied evenly. "We're here regarding Victor Montgomery's complaint against the families living on the southeastern boundary." Collins shuffled papers on his desk. "That matter is settled. The land in question was legally purchased from the reservation. The occupants have 3 more days to vacate before military enforcement." Eleanor watched Hawke's jaw tighten, but he maintained his composure. Foster took the lead, laying out their evidence methodically. The original boundary maps, the rejected modification proposals, legal opinions from 2 territorial judges they'd consulted in Tucson. Collins grew increasingly uncomfortable as Foster built their case. "These are interesting historical documents," he conceded reluctantly, "but Mr. Montgomery has deeds of sale signed by authorized representatives." "Fraudulent signatures," Hawke interjected. "None of the tribal council members whose names appear on those documents ever consented to sell sacred land." "That's a serious allegation," Collins blustered. "One easily verified," Foster countered. "The tribal council is meeting today, is it not? Let them examine these supposed deeds personally." Collins paled slightly. "That's not standard procedure." "Neither is evicting people from land that was never legally sold," Eleanor pointed out. "Unless you're certain the signatures are genuine, you risk creating a diplomatic incident that will reflect poorly on your administration." The implied threat to his reputation worked. After further negotiation, Collins reluctantly agreed to postpone the eviction orders pending a formal review of all documentation. He summoned 3 tribal council members to his office, where they immediately identified the signatures on Montgomery's deeds as forgeries. "This is not my mark," declared Grey Wolf, the eldest council member, pointing to a crude X on the document. "I have never signed any paper selling the land of our ancestors." By sunset, Collins had officially rescinded the eviction orders and initiated an investigation into the fraudulent land sales. Eleanor watched the relief spread through the threatened families as Hawke delivered the news in Apache, his usually stoic expression softening as children ran to embrace him in gratitude. Later, as they prepared to depart, the tribal council held a small ceremony thanking them for their intervention. The elderly medicine woman presented Eleanor with a beautifully crafted bracelet of silver and turquoise. "This stone carries the memory of our mountains," she explained through Hawk's translation. "It will remind you that you have friends among the people." Eleanor accepted the gift with appropriate reverence, unexpectedly moved by the connection forged through their shared struggle against Montgomery's machinations. As they rode away from San Carlos the following morning, Eleanor felt a sense of accomplishment tinged with unease. "Montgomery won't take this defeat lightly," she observed. "We've challenged him twice now and won." "3 times, Foster corrected. "Your ranch, the weapons trafficking charges, although he wriggled free of those, and now this land grab. He'll be looking for revenge. Let him come," Hawk said quietly. "We've proven he's not invincible." Eleanor studied her companion's profile against the rising sun. "You're not returning to Fort Bowie, are you?" Hawk shook his head. "Captain Reynolds received orders transferring me to Fort Apache. Very sudden. Orders delivered the day after Montgomery's release. Montgomery's influence," Foster concluded grimly, "separating the allies who defeated him. I've requested a discharge instead," Hawk continued. "My enlistment term is nearly complete." "What will you do?" Eleanor asked, surprised by how much his answer mattered to her. Hawk met her gaze directly. "The tribal council has asked me to serve as their representative in land disputes. With Foster's legal guidance, we might prevent future encroachments." "A worthy cause," Foster approved, "though not one likely to make you popular with certain powerful interests." "Popularity has never been my concern," Hawk replied dryly. They parted ways at the territorial crossroads, Foster returning to Tucson, Hawk heading temporarily to Fort Bowie to formalize his discharge, and Eleanor beginning the journey back to Blackwood Ranch. Before they separated, Hawk approached Eleanor privately. "Montgomery will target you first," he warned. "You're the one who initiated his downfall, and the Blackwood Ranch remains desirable property." "We'll be vigilant," Eleanor promised. "Father has already spoken with neighboring ranchers about mutual protection." "I'll return to Copper Creek when my discharge is processed," Hawk said. "The tribal council wants to establish a permanent presence there to monitor boundary disputes. I could check on your situation periodically." Eleanor smiled at his careful formality. "I'd welcome that. Partners, remember?" Something warmed in Hawk's dark eyes. Partners. As Eleanor rode the familiar trail home, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in mere weeks. From the brink of losing everything to reclaiming not just her family's land, but a sense of purpose and justice. The challenges ahead remained daunting: rebuilding the ranch, preparing for Montgomery's inevitable retaliation, forging new alliances with unexpected allies. But for the first time since her mother's death, Eleanor Blackwood faced the future. With something beyond determination, she faced it with hope. Fall came to the Arizona Territory in subtle shifts. Cooler mornings, earlier sunsets, and the occasional golden leaf spiraling down from the cottonwoods along Spring Creek. 3 months had passed since Eleanor's confrontation with Montgomery at San Carlos, and life at Blackwood Ranch had settled into a cautious rhythm of recovery. The small cattle herd was growing, bolstered by a fortuitous trade with Martha Jenkins, who had exchanged a dozen healthy heifers for Eleanor's help, training her new quarter horses. Thomas Blackwood remained sober, though the struggle was evident in the occasional tremor of his hands and the haunted look that sometimes crossed his face in the evenings. Daniel Hawk had made good on his promise, establishing himself in a small cabin at the edge of Copper Creek after receiving his honorable discharge from the Army. His official role as liaison between the Apache Tribal Council and territorial authorities kept him busy, but he found time to visit Blackwood Ranch at least Weekly, often bringing news from town or lending a hand with repairs, Eleanor was mending tack in the barn when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She stepped outside, recognizing Hawk's pinto mare and the rider's distinctive silhouette against the afternoon sun. "You're early this week," she called in greeting as he dismounted. Hawk's expression was grave as he secured his horse. "News from Tucson. Montgomery has been appointed to the Territorial Land Commission." Eleanor's hands stilled on the bridle she'd been repairing. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means he now has official authority to review property claims, survey disputed boundaries, and make recommendations regarding land rights across the territory." Hawk removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair in frustration. "Governor Burke signed the appointment yesterday." "How is that possible? After everything that's happened?" "Politics," Hawk replied grimly. "Montgomery has powerful friends and deep pockets. He donated a substantial sum to the governor's re-election fund last month." Eleanor leaned against the barn door, processing this unwelcome development. "So, he'll use his position to target us, and the Apache lands, and anyone else who's crossed him." Hawk's voice held controlled anger. "But he'll do it legally now, with the territory's authority behind him." Thomas emerged from the ranch house, catching the tail end of their conversation. "That snake never stays down for long," he muttered. "What's his first move likely to be?" "Property reassessment," Hawk replied. "The commission is authorized to review existing claims against original Spanish land grants, territorial surveys, and federal allocations." "Our deed is solid," Thomas said confidently, "held by Blackwoods for 3 generations. Montgomery will find loopholes," Eleanor countered, thinking strategically. "We need to prepare." Hawk nodded in agreement. "That's why I'm here. Foster is organizing a meeting in Tucson next week. Ranchers, miners, tribal representatives, anyone with land Montgomery might target. There's strength in numbers." "I should go," Eleanor decided. "Father can manage the ranch for a few days." Thomas started to protest, but stopped himself, recognition flickering in his eyes. This was no longer his battle alone. His daughter had earned the right to represent Blackwood interests. "Take Jenkins Bay gelding," he said instead. "He's fresher than your mare." The decision settled, they moved to more immediate concerns. Hawk had brought supplies from town: coffee, sugar, ammunition, and newspapers. As they unloaded his saddlebags, Eleanor noticed an official-looking envelope tucked among the items. "What's this?" she asked, gesturing to the document. "Notice of public hearing," Hawk explained. "The Land Commission is reviewing water rights along Copper Creek. All property owners with creek access are required to present documentation of their water claims." Eleanor exchanged a knowing look with her father. "The creeks feed the river feeds Montgomery's proposed reservoir project." "Exactly," Hawk confirmed. "He's starting with water because it's the lifeblood of every ranch. Control the water, control the land," Thomas finished, "just like he tried with us." Eleanor unfolded the notice, scanning its contents. "The hearing is in 2 weeks. That gives us time to attend Foster's meeting first and formulate a strategy." That evening, after Hawk departed, Eleanor and her father sorted through the family strongbox, organizing every deed, survey, and legal document related to their water rights. The Blackwood claim to Spring Creek dated back to territorial days, but Eleanor knew from bitter experience that solid documentation didn't guarantee protection against Montgomery's manipulations. "There's something I should show you," Thomas said hesitantly, producing a worn journal from beneath a false bottom in the strongbox. "Your grandfather's private accounts of the early days, including how he secured water rights during the drought of 42. Eleanor accepted the journal with surprise. "I didn't know this existed." "Few do," Thomas replied. "Some of what's written here, well, our ancestors weren't always saints when it came to claiming what they wanted." As Eleanor read through her grandfather's neat handwriting, she understood her father's discomfort. Jonathan Blackwood had diverted Spring Creek's flow during a critical drought, depriving a neighboring Mexican rancher of water. When the neighbor confronted him, harsh words led to gunfire. The neighbor died, and Jonathan claimed the disputed water rights through a sympathetic territorial judge. "This could be damaging if Montgomery discovers it," Eleanor said quietly. Closing the journal, Thomas nodded grimly. "Many frontier properties have similar shadows in their history. Montgomery will dig until he finds them. Then we need allies with equal motivation to keep their pasts buried," Eleanor concluded. "People with too much to lose if old methods of acquiring land come to light." Thomas regarded his daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. "You're thinking like him now?" "I'm thinking like someone who intends to survive him," Eleanor corrected. "There's a difference." The journey to Tucson was uneventful, though Eleanor remained vigilant. Montgomery's reach was long, and she traveled alone until meeting Hawk at the territorial border as planned. They arrived at Foster's law office to find it already crowded with concerned landowners. Eleanor recognized several faces: ranchers from near Copper Creek, a mine owner from Bisbee, representatives from both the San Carlos and White Mountain Apache. Foster stood at his desk, organizing the impromptu gathering with the efficiency of a man used to managing territorial disputes. "Miss Blackwood," he greeted her. "Your timing is excellent. We were just discussing Montgomery's pattern of targeting properties with complex histories, like those with competing claims under Spanish land grants versus territorial allocations," added a gray-haired rancher Eleanor knew as Joseph Carter. His spread east of Copper Creek was one of the largest in the region, or properties with boundaries that cross tribal lands. Contributed an Apache man, introduced as Running Elk, a council member from White Mountain. Foster spread a large territorial map across his desk. "Montgomery is methodical. He's marked every property that opposed him in past ventures." Red circles dotted the map, concentrated around Copper Creek, San Carlos, and the southern mining districts. "He can't possibly challenge this many claims at once," Eleanor observed. "He doesn't need to," Foster explained. "He just needs to create uncertainty, force expensive legal battles, drain resources until selling becomes the only option." "Then we pool our resources," Hawk suggested. "Create a defense fund for those targeted first." The discussion continued for hours, strategies proposed and refined. By evening, they had established a mutual defense alliance, with Foster as legal counsel and a system for sharing information about Montgomery's movements. As the meeting concluded, Carter approached Eleanor privately. "Your father and I have had our differences over the years," he began gruffly, "but we Copper Creek ranchers need to stand together now. My foreman tells me you're rebuilding your herd." "Slowly," Eleanor acknowledged. "We lost most of our breeding stock during the drought." Carter nodded thoughtfully. "I drive 100 heads to Kansas next month. Could use extra hands. Paying good wages, plus a small share of profits." The offer surprised Eleanor. Carter was known for his solitary nature and reluctance to involve neighboring ranchers in his business. "Why now?" she asked directly. Carter's weathered face creased in a wry smile. "Let's just say my own ranch history wouldn't withstand Montgomery's scrutiny either. Self-preservation makes surprising allies." Eleanor accepted the opportunity, recognizing both the financial benefit and the strategic advantage of strengthening connections with powerful neighbors. The following morning, as they prepared to return to Copper Creek, Foster received an urgent message from his contact in the governor's office. His expression grew grave as he read it. "Montgomery's first official act as commissioner," he informed them, handing over the document. "He's ordering a complete resurvey of the Copper Creek watershed, citing irregularities in the original territorial surveys." "What irregularities?" Eleanor demanded. "He doesn't need to specify at this stage," Foster replied. "The commission has authority to investigate perceived discrepancies." Hawke studied the order. The survey team arrives in 10 days. They'll remeasure every property line, re-establish creek boundaries, and verify corner markers against the Spanish land grant measurements. Many markers have been lost or moved over the years, Eleanor realized. Some deliberately, some by natural causes. Exactly, Foster confirmed. And without original markers, they'll rely on the oldest available documentation. Eleanor thought of her grandfather's journal, the damning account of how their water rights were truly secured. What if the documentation itself is questionable? Then Montgomery has his opening, Foster said gravely. This is how he'll begin dismantling property claims. One marker, one measurement, one document at a time. They returned to Copper Creek with renewed urgency, spreading word of Montgomery's survey order among neighboring ranchers. Most reacted with the suspicion typical of independent landowners, but the shared threat gradually overcame traditional rivalries. A week before the survey team's scheduled arrival, Eleanor organized a meeting at Blackwood Ranch. A dozen property owners gathered in the barn, poring over maps and comparing deed descriptions. The problem is here. Carter pointed to the northwest corner of his property, where it adjoined Blackwood land. My grandfather and yours adjusted this line in '39 after the flash flood changed the creek bed. They shook hands on it, but the official documents were never updated. Similar stories emerged across the assembled ranches. Informal agreements, landmarks lost to time, boundaries shifted by mutual consent but never legally recorded. The patchwork of actual land use versus official documentation created numerous vulnerabilities Montgomery could exploit. We need to decide what we're protecting, Eleanor said after hours of circular discussion. We can't defend every acre as originally claimed. What are you suggesting? Asked Henry Miller, whose sheep ranch bordered the Blackwood's eastern boundary. Strategic consolidation, Eleanor replied. Each ranch identifies its essential water rights and grazing lands. We focus our defense there, potentially conceding marginal areas that would be costly to defend legally. Surrender land willingly? Carter objected. That's playing into Montgomery's hands. Not surrender, Hawke interjected. Tactical redistribution between allies, not to Montgomery. Understanding dawned slowly as Eleanor expanded on the concept. If ranchers formalized their actual land usage through legal exchanges before the survey, swapping parcels they had informally agreed upon years ago, many of the discrepancies Montgomery hoped to exploit would disappear. We're creating a new official record that matches the reality on the ground, Thomas said, grasping the strategy. Closing gaps before Montgomery can wedge them open. The plan required swift action and unprecedented cooperation. Judge Wilson was summoned from his circuit, arriving 2 days later to oversee the legal exchanges. Eleanor worked tirelessly, mediating disputes between neighbors who suddenly needed to formalize generations of handshake agreements. By the time Montgomery's survey team arrived, led by a tight-lipped engineer named Wilson, the ranchers of Copper Creek presented a united front. New boundary markers stood at freshly surveyed corners, supported by legally filed documents bearing Judge Wilson's official seal. Eleanor watched from horseback as the surveyors began their work on Blackwood land, their irritation evident as they found new markers matching their own measurements precisely. Their careful preparation had denied Montgomery his first avenue of attack. The victory was short-lived. 3 days into the survey, a messenger arrived at Blackwood Ranch with an official notice from the Territorial Land Commission. All properties along Spring Creek were ordered to cease water diversion pending review of an environmental impact assessment. Environmental impact? Thomas read incredulously. Since when does Montgomery care about nature? Since it became a legal tool to control water, Eleanor replied, reading the fine print of the order. He's claiming excessive irrigation is damaging downstream habitats. The timing couldn't have been worse. Late summer heat had already stressed the pastures, and without irrigation, the remaining grazing land would quickly brown and die. That evening, Eleanor found Hawke at his cabin on the edge of town, poring over legal documents by lamplight. Foster sent these, he explained, showing her territorial statutes regarding water rights. Montgomery is exploiting a new federal directive about riparian conservation. Can he actually prevent us from using water that crosses our land? Eleanor asked. Temporarily, yes. The Commission has emergency authority to suspend usage pending investigation. Hawke rubbed his tired eyes. But there's a weakness in his approach. The directive requires scientific assessment, not just administrative declaration, meaning we need our own environmental study proving our water use is sustainable. Hawke pulled out another document. Foster suggests contacting this man, Professor James Harrington from the Territorial University. He specializes in desert ecology and water conservation. Will he stand against Montgomery? According to Foster, Harrington has been fighting mining companies over water pollution for years. He has no love for powerful interests that damage the land. Eleanor studied the professor's credentials. It's worth trying. How quickly can he come? That's the problem, Hawke admitted. He's currently in California presenting research. He won't return for at least 3 weeks. Our pastures won't last 3 weeks without water, Eleanor said, frustration evident in her voice, which is exactly what Montgomery is counting on. Hawke's expression hardened. He's trying to force immediate hardship, knowing ranchers will start fighting among themselves over the remaining water sources. Eleanor paced the small cabin, mind racing through possibilities. What if we comply with the letter of his order, but not its intent? Hawke raised an eyebrow. Meaning? The order specifies no diversion from Spring Creek specifically. It doesn't mention groundwater or collection of rainwater. Eleanor's eyes lit with determination. My grandfather dug a system of wells before the creek access was secured. They're old, and many have collapsed, but they exist. Reopening wells takes time and labor, Hawke pointed out, which we have if we work together. Eleanor leaned over the map spread on Hawke's table. And here, the Jenkins property has a natural depression that could be expanded into a catchment basin for the summer thunderstorms. Understanding dawned in Hawke's eyes. Alternative water sources, temporary measures to keep the ranches viable, until Harrington can provide scientific counter-evidence. Exactly, Eleanor traced potential well locations on the map. If each ranch contributes workers to help their neighbors, we could establish enough alternative sources within a week. Montgomery won't like it, Hawke warned, though she could see he approved of the plan. Montgomery can't stop us from digging on our own property, Eleanor replied with grim satisfaction. He's not the only one who knows how to exploit legal technicalities. They worked late into the night, developing the strategy and identifying priority locations. By morning, Eleanor had drafted a proposal to present to the neighboring ranchers. Carter was the first to commit resources, offering his well-digging equipment and 3 experienced hands. Others followed, recognizing that survival required unprecedented cooperation. Even Miller, traditionally suspicious of cattle ranchers, volunteered his sons to help with the Jenkins catchment basin. For the next week, the ranchers of Copper Creek worked as a single unit, moving from property to property, establishing alternative water sources wherever possible. Eleanor directed operations on Blackwood land, supervising the reopening of 3 forgotten wells her grandfather had dug decades earlier. The work was backbreaking, and progress was painfully slow. The old wells had partially collapsed, requiring careful excavation to avoid further cave-ins. By the 5th day, they had successfully reopened 2, providing enough water to sustain their most essential pastures. Eleanor was inspecting the 2nd well when she noticed a dust cloud approaching from town. A rider pushed his horse hard, and she recognized William Jenkins' lanky form. "Montgomery's coming," he called as he reached the workers. with the sheriff and a court order. Eleanor quickly organized the workers, sending most to continue at the third well site, while she and Hawke, who had been helping with the excavation, went to meet the unwelcome visitors. Montgomery rode at the head of a small party. Sheriff Mitchell, the survey engineer, and two men Eleanor didn't recognize but assumed were commission officials. Montgomery's expression was thunderous as he dismounted, waving a document at Eleanor. "This stops now, Miss Blackwood," he demanded. "You're in contempt of the Commission's order." Eleanor accepted the paper calmly, reading it before responding. "This order prohibits diversion from Spring Creek. We're not touching the creek water, Mr. Montgomery." "Don't play games," Montgomery snapped. "You were ordered to cease irrigation activities." "We were ordered to cease creek water diversion," Eleanor corrected, handing the original order to Sheriff Mitchell. "Which we have. These wells access groundwater, not creek flow. Nothing in your order addresses well water." The sheriff reviewed both documents, his expression suggesting reluctant agreement with Eleanor's interpretation. "She's technically correct. Montgomery, the order specifically mentions creek diversion. This is blatant defiance of the Commission's intent," Montgomery insisted, color rising in his face. "Intent is not law," Hawke interjected quietly. "As a commissioner, you should appreciate the importance of precise language in legal orders." Montgomery turned his cold gaze on Hawke. "This isn't over," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous softness. "Enjoy your little victory while it lasts, Miss Blackwood. The Commission meets next week to review all water rights in the territory, wells included." As Montgomery and his party departed, Eleanor knew they had won only a temporary reprieve. The real battle for their land and water was just beginning. But looking at the neighboring ranches working side by side, old rivalries set aside in the face of common threat, she felt a surge of determined hope. Montgomery had always prevailed, by dividing his opponents, exploiting individual vulnerabilities. Now he faced something new, a community united against him. The approaching winter would bring new challenges, but Eleanor Blackwood was no longer fighting alone. The first snow of winter dusted the mountains above Copper Creek as Eleanor prepared for her journey to Tucson. The Territorial Land Commission's hearing on water rights was scheduled for the following week, and much depended on her presentation of the rancher's case. "Professor Harrington's report is comprehensive," Daniel Hawke said, as he helped secure her documents in oilskin pouches for protection against the weather. "His findings clearly show the sustainable usage of groundwater by all Copper Creek ranches. Montgomery will have his own experts," Eleanor replied, checking her saddlebags one final time. "Men whose research conveniently supports whatever conclusion he's paid for." Thomas Blackwood entered the ranch house kitchen, stamping snow from his boots. "Carter's son just rode through. The North Trail is already drifting over. If you're going to make Tucson by Tuesday, you should take the southern route through Apache Pass." Eleanor exchanged a concerned glance with Hawke. "That adds a day to the journey. Better late than buried in a snowdrift," her father countered. "And you'll have company. Hawke knows that trail better than anyone." The decision was made, and they departed within the hour. The southern route skirted the mountains, following an old Apache trading path before connecting with the main road to Tucson. Though longer, it offered more shelter and reliable water sources, critical advantages as winter tightened its grip on the territory. They made camp the first night in a protected canyon, building a small fire against the growing cold. Eleanor spread the maps they would present to the Commission, reviewing her arguments one more time. "Montgomery will claim the wells are depleting the underground springs that feed the creek," she reasoned. "Harrington's measurements counter that, but we need more than science. We need to appeal to the other commissioners' self-interest." Hawke nodded, adding a branch to their fire. Two of the 5 commissioners own mining operations that rely on groundwater. If they restrict wells on ranches, they set a precedent that could harm their own interests. Exactly. And Commissioner Wilkins married into a ranching family near Prescott. He'll understand the devastation these restrictions would cause. They spent the evening refining their strategy, identifying each commissioner's vulnerabilities and motivations. Eleanor was no longer the desperate daughter fighting to save her family's ranch. She had become a skilled tactician in the territorial power struggles that shaped the Arizona frontier. The following day brought unexpected complications. As they neared Apache Pass, they encountered a small group of travelers headed north, a family of settlers with a wagon in dire need of repair. The father had attempted to fix a broken axle, but lacking proper tools, his efforts were failing. "We need to reach Tucson by Tuesday," Eleanor said quietly to Hawk as they assessed the situation. "We'll still make it," he replied. "But these people won't survive another night exposed on this trail. The temperature will drop below freezing." Without further discussion, they dismounted to help. Hawk's knowledge of temporary repairs, learned during his scouting days, proved invaluable. By mid-afternoon, the wagon was serviceable enough to reach the next settlement. The grateful family offered payment, which Eleanor declined. "Just remember that not all stories about Apache scouts or ranchers' daughters are true," she said, noting how the mother had initially clutched her children closer when Hawk approached. "Some of us are simply neighbors. The delay cost them valuable time, forcing them to make camp earlier than planned as darkness fell." That night, as they sat by their fire, Hawk was unusually quiet. "What's troubling you?" Eleanor finally asked. Hawk stared into the flames. "That family today, the way they looked at me before they understood I was helping them, it never changes." "Fear of the unknown," Eleanor said. "They've heard stories but never met your people." "It's more than that." Hawk's voice remained steady, but she could sense the deep current of emotion beneath it. "No matter how many settlers I guided safely as a scout, no matter how many lives I saved, I remained the Apache first, never just a man." Eleanor considered his words carefully. "When we first met, would you have trusted a white rancher's daughter to stand beside you against Montgomery?" A hint of a smile crossed his face. "No, I would have expected you to side with your own kind. Yet here we are," Eleanor gestured to the space between them. "Perhaps change comes one person at a time, one encounter that challenges what we thought we knew." Hawk nodded slowly. "My mother used to say that understanding flows like water. It finds paths through even the hardest stone, given enough time." "Wise. Words," Eleanor replied, "and fitting considering our battle over water rights. The unexpected delay proved fortuitous in ways they couldn't have predicted. Reaching Tucson a day later than planned, they discovered the commission hearing had been postponed due to the illness of Commissioner Wilkins. 2 more days to strengthen our case," Foster told them when they met at his office. "And more importantly, time to meet privately with Commissioner Davis before the formal hearing." Davis, it emerged, had once opposed Montgomery in a mining dispute and harbored lingering resentment over his defeat. With Foster's careful guidance, Eleanor presented their scientific findings to Davis that evening, emphasizing how ruling in their favor would check Montgomery's growing influence. "Many in the territory are concerned about one man wielding so much control over land and water," she noted diplomatically. "A balanced decision would demonstrate the Commission's independence." Davis, a shrewd businessman himself, understood the unspoken message. "The Commission serves all territorial interests, Miss Blackwood, not just the wealthy and connected." The formal hearing convened 2 days later in the Territorial Capitol building. Eleanor presented the rancher's case with calm precision, supported by Harrington's scientific testimony. Montgomery countered with his own experts, arguing that unrestricted well digging threatened the entire watershed. The commissioner's questioning revealed the political currents swirling beneath the scientific debate. When the final vote came, it split along predictable lines, except for Davis, whose pivotal vote resulted in a compromise. The Copper Creek ranchers would retain their well water rights, but with quarterly monitoring and usage restrictions during severe drought. A partial victory, Foster concluded as they left the capital. You keep your water with conditions. Conditions we can live with, Eleanor replied. For now. Montgomery intercepted them on the Capitol steps, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts on the Commission's decision. "Impressive advocacy, Miss Blackwood," he said with cold courtesy. "You've become quite the territorial politician. Just a rancher protecting her livelihood, Mr. Montgomery." His grey eyes hardened. "This phase of our disagreement is concluded. But the Land Commission has many responsibilities beyond water rights. I expect we'll have the opportunity to revisit other aspects of the Blackwood holdings in due course." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "We'll be prepared whenever that day comes." "I'm counting on it," Montgomery replied with a thin smile. "The game is always more interesting when opponents are evenly matched." As he walked away, Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. Montgomery viewed their conflict as a strategic game, one he had been playing far longer than she had. Each move and countermove was simply positioning for the final confrontation that would eventually come. On the return journey to Copper Creek, Eleanor and Hawk traveled in companionable silence for long stretches, each absorbed in their thoughts. The path ahead contained both promise and peril. The alliance of ranchers had held firm through this challenge, but Montgomery would surely test it again, probing for weaknesses. "What happens next?" Hawk asked, as they created the final ridge overlooking the Blackwood Ranch, its buildings small in the distance. Eleanor surveyed the land that had nearly been taken from her, now partially transformed by their cooperative efforts with neighboring ranchers. New irrigation channels connected the wells to critical pastures. Repaired fences marked recently formalized property lines. Signs of resilience and adaptation were everywhere. "We continue building," she said simply. "The ranch, the alliances, our defenses against whatever Montgomery plans next." Hawk studied her profile against the setting sun. "You've changed since that day I first saw you defending me in town." "We both have," Eleanor acknowledged. "I was fighting for what was mine. Now I'm fighting for something larger. A future where Montgomery doesn't determine who thrives and who loses everything," Hawk suggested. Eleanor nodded, urging her horse forward down the trail toward home. "A future we'll build together, despite him." As they rode the final distance to Blackwood Ranch, Eleanor reflected on the strange journey that had begun with her father's desperate wager. The cruel land baron had indeed taken much from them, but in fighting to reclaim what was rightfully theirs, she and her unlikely Apache ally had found something unexpected, a common purpose that transcended the boundaries of background and birth. The game, as Montgomery called it, was far from over. But for the first time, Eleanor truly believed they could win. Spring brought renewal to the Arizona territory. The harsh winter had given way to wildflowers carpeting the valleys, fresh grass in the pastures, and a cautious optimism among the ranchers of Copper Creek. 6 months had passed since the water rights victory in Tucson, and Montgomery had been uncharacteristically quiet during that time. "It's the calm before the storm," Thomas Blackwood warned, as he and Eleanor inspected their growing herd. The cattle had wintered well, and the spring calving promised a significant increase to their stock. "Montgomery is planning something. He always is." Eleanor nodded in agreement, but kept her concerns measured. "We've strengthened our position. The alliance with Carter and the others holds firm. Our legal documentation is in order. And Hawk's influence with both the Apache councils and the army provides additional security," Thomas added, a knowing look in his eye. Eleanor chose not to acknowledge her father's implied question about her relationship with Daniel Hawke. Their partnership had deepened over the winter months, evolving into something neither of them had put into words yet. Hawke now divided his time between his duties as tribal representative and helping at Blackwood Ranch, his steady presence becoming as natural as the changing seasons. The ranchers' alliance had flourished despite Montgomery's occasional attempts to create divisions. Regular meetings at the various properties had fostered genuine friendships, and combined cattle drives had proven more efficient and safer than individual efforts. Eleanor was reviewing the books for their upcoming drive to the railhead when William Jenkins arrived with unexpected news. "Montgomery sold his commission seat," he announced without preamble, "resigned yesterday and appointed his replacement before anyone could object." Eleanor set down her pencil, instantly alert. "Who's the replacement?" "James Sullivan, Montgomery's former mining engineer." "A puppet," Eleanor concluded. But why would Montgomery step down from a position of such influence? The answer came the following day, when Daniel Hawke returned from Fort Bowie with a territorial newspaper. The headline announced Victor Montgomery's candidacy for territorial delegate to Congress. "He's aiming higher," Hawke said grimly, spreading the paper on the kitchen table. As territorial delegate, he'd have Washington's ear on all matters affecting Arizona. Eleanor studied the announcement, noting the carefully crafted language about development, progress, and securing Arizona's future. "He's positioning himself as the territory's champion while planning to sell us all to the highest bidders," she observed. Thomas joined them at the table, his expression troubled. A man like Montgomery in Congress would mean unrestricted access. For mining companies, water rights diverted to the highest bidders, and tribes pushed from any land deemed valuable. "We need to stop him," Eleanor said simply. Hawke raised an eyebrow. "How? He has wealth, connections, and half the territory's businessmen in his pocket." Eleanor's mind raced through possibilities. By offering voters an alternative, someone who represents the actual working people of the territory, ranchers, farmers, shopkeepers, someone not beholden to mining interests or land speculators. "Like who?" Thomas asked. Eleanor met Hawke's gaze across the table, seeing the same realization, dawn in his eyes that had just occurred to her. "Joseph Carter," they said in unison. Carter was the perfect counterbalance to Montgomery, a self-made rancher respected across the territory, known for fair dealings with his neighbors and principled stands against corporate overreach. His age and experience lent him gravitas, while his frontier pragmatism resonated with territorial voters. The challenge was convincing him to run. Carter had always avoided politics, preferring to manage his ranch and family affairs without the complications of public life. Eleanor and Hawke rode to the Carter ranch that same afternoon, finding the old rancher mending tack on his front porch. "Absolutely not," was his immediate response to their proposal. "Politics is a young man's game, full of compromise and empty promises, which is precisely why Montgomery will win if someone like you doesn't oppose him," Eleanor countered. "He's counting on good men staying silent." Carter shook his grey head stubbornly. "Find someone else. I've got 60 years of plain speaking behind me. Can't start lying to people now." "That's exactly why it should be you," Hawke said quietly. "Your honesty is what the territory needs." For an hour they made their case, outlining what Montgomery's election would mean for the future of Arizona. Carter listened, his weathered face revealing little of his thoughts. Finally, he stood with a heavy sigh. "Let me discuss it with Martha. 45 years of marriage means I don't make decisions like this alone." It took 2 days for Carter to give them his answer. When he did, it came with conditions. "I'll run," he told the assembled ranchers at an emergency meeting in Copper Creek. "But I won't shake hands and kiss babies in saloons. I won't promise what I can't deliver, and I expect every one of you to speak on my behalf in your communities." The campaign that followed transformed the territory. Montgomery had expected an easy victory, perhaps facing a token politician from Tucson or a businessman from Phoenix. Instead, he confronted a grassroots movement of ordinary Arizonans rallying behind Carter's straightforward message of fair treatment for all territorial interests, not just the wealthy and connected. Eleanor found herself at the center of the campaign, coordinating messengers between settlements, drafting position statements on water rights and land usage, and arranging speaking events where Carter could address voters directly. Hawke worked tirelessly alongside her, leveraging his connections with tribal communities to build unprecedented support among native voters who had traditionally been excluded from territorial politics. With Benjamin Foster's legal expertise, they crafted compelling arguments about Montgomery's history of manipulating land claims and exploiting territorial resources. Former Indian agent Collins, feeling remorse over his role in Montgomery's schemes, came forward with damning testimony about falsified documents and pressured officials. The campaign faced its first major test when Montgomery's newspaper allies published a scathing editorial questioning Carter's fitness for office. The piece insinuated that Carter's advancing age made him unfit for the rigors of Washington politics and suggested his frontier mentality would embarrass the territory among more sophisticated Eastern politicians. Rather than responding with anger, Carter turned the attack to his advantage at a crowded campaign gathering in Prescott. "My opponent worries about my frontier mentality," the old rancher told the assembled voters, his voice carrying clearly across the town square. "He's right to worry. This frontier mentality built Arizona while men like Montgomery were still counting their money in Eastern parlors. This frontier mentality means saying what you mean and standing by your word. It means judging a person by their actions, not their wealth. If that embarrasses the politicians in Washington, then they need more embarrassment." The crowd erupted in cheers, and word of Carter's speech spread throughout the territory, resonating with voters tired of slick promises and corporate interests. Disguised as progress, Montgomery's reaction was swift and ruthless. Newspapers friendly to his interests published scathing articles questioning Carter's qualifications. Anonymous leaflets circulated suggesting Carter secretly supported policies that would harm mining interests and territorial development. Merchants who publicly backed Carter found their supply contracts mysteriously cancelled. When these tactics failed to shift public opinion, Montgomery attempted to divide the alliance by approaching individual ranchers with private offers: debt forgiveness, favorable water rights, exclusive grazing permits on contested lands. To their credit, each approached rancher reported these attempts to Eleanor and Carter, strengthening rather than weakening their coalition. Sheriff Mitchell found himself caught in the middle, pressured by Montgomery's political allies to enforce obscure ordinances against Carter supporters, while simultaneously facing the growing public sentiment against such obvious manipulation. "I can't keep walking this line forever, Miss Blackwood," he confided to Eleanor after declining to shut down a Carter campaign meeting for a supposed permit violation. "Sooner or later, Montgomery will find someone willing to wear this badge, who doesn't mind following orders without question." "Then help us ensure it doesn't come to that," Eleanor replied. "The election is just weeks away." The final campaign stretch brought unexpected allies. Several prominent merchants in Tucson, tired of Montgomery's monopolistic practices, publicly endorsed Carter. A respected newspaper editor in Phoenix published a detailed investigation into Montgomery's business dealings, revealing patterns of fraud and intimidation that had been whispered about for years but never documented so thoroughly. Most surprisingly, Captain Reynolds returned from assignment in California with orders to ensure fair and transparent electoral processes throughout the territory, a directive that allowed Army personnel to protect polling locations from intimidation. Reynolds never explicitly supported either candidate, but his pointed presence at Carter rallies sent a clear message about where military sympathies lay. Montgomery, sensing his advantage slipping away, made one last desperate move. Eleanor was returning from a campaign meeting in a neighboring settlement when she spotted smoke rising from the direction of Blackwood Ranch. Urging her horse to a gallop, she arrived to find the barn engulfed in flames and her father directing a bucket brigade of neighboring ranchers. "It was deliberate," Thomas told her grimly when the fire was finally contained. "Two men rode up, threw coal oil on the barn, and lit it before riding off. Jenkins' boy recognized one of them, Montgomery's foreman. The attack backfired spectacularly." News of Montgomery's tactics spread rapidly throughout the territory, confirming what many had suspected about his character and methods. Even business owners who had benefited from his enterprises began distancing themselves, unwilling to be associated with such blatant criminality. Sheriff Mitchell finally pushed beyond his tolerance for Montgomery's methods, issued warrants for the arrest of the suspected arsonists. When Montgomery's foreman was apprehended at a wayside tavern, he quickly implicated his employer in exchange for leniency. "Montgomery told us to send a message," he confessed. "Said make it clear what happens to people who stand against him." These revelations came just days before the election, cementing public opinion against Montgomery. Even his wealthiest supporters began hedging their positions, unwilling to back a candidate now openly linked to criminal intimidation. On Election Day, settlers from across the territory turned out in unprecedented numbers. When the votes were finally counted 3 days later, Joseph Carter had won by a substantial margin, carrying not just the ranching communities but also significant support from mining towns and settlements across Arizona. Montgomery's defeat was total and public. His carefully constructed image as the territory's great developer had crumbled, revealing the ruthless opportunist beneath. When Eleanor and Hawk encountered him on Tucson's main street after the results were announced, his cold fury was barely contained. "Congratulations on your temporary victory, Miss Blackwood," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "But political fortunes change. I'll be watching for Carter to make a mistake, and he will." "The territory is watching too," Eleanor replied calmly. "Your methods are exposed now. Your power was built on shadows and fear, and both are receding." Montgomery's gaze shifted to Hawk. "Strange alliances don't last in this territory. History proves that." "We're making new history," Hawk replied simply. As Montgomery walked away, Eleanor felt no triumph, only grim satisfaction that the man who had once nearly taken everything from her family had been checked, not through violence or manipulation, but through the collective will of the people he had long exploited. The celebration that evening at the Copper Creek Saloon brought together an unlikely assemblage. Ranchers and merchants, army officers and Apache representatives, all united in their relief at Montgomery's defeat. Carter, never comfortable as the center of attention, nevertheless gave a short speech, thanking those who had made his victory possible. "Miss Blackwood and Mr. Hawk deserve more credit than I do," he concluded, raising his glass to Eleanor and Hawk, who stood near the back of the crowded room. "They showed us that fighting for what's right isn't just about protecting your own interests. It's about standing together against those who would take from all of us." Later that evening, as celebrations continued across Tucson, Eleanor and Hawk found a quiet moment on the hotel balcony overlooking the plaza. "What happens now?" Eleanor asked, watching the festivities below. "Carter goes to Washington. Montgomery plots his return. The territory continues evolving." Hawk turned to face her, his expression serious. "And you?" Eleanor considered the question. The past year had transformed her from a desperate daughter fighting for her family's land into a woman who had helped change the territory's future. The challenges ahead were different but no less daunting, rebuilding the ranch to its former prosperity, maintaining the alliances they'd formed, remaining vigilant against Montgomery's inevitable attempts to regain power. "I'll stay the course," she decided. "The ranch, the alliances, the work we've started." "We," Hawke repeated thoughtfully. "You still see this as our shared path?" Eleanor met his gaze directly. "I do, if you choose to walk it with me." Hawke took her hand, the gesture more meaningful than any words between them had been. The Apache have a saying, "Mountains divide the land, but trails connect the people." "Our trails converge for a reason, Eleanor Blackwood." "And what reason might that be?" she asked, though she already knew the answer in her heart. "To show that the divisions others create, between rancher and Apache, between woman and man, between the powerful and those they would control, these are not the natural order of things. They're just boundaries drawn by men like Montgomery." Eleanor smiled, remembering the frightened young woman she had been when her father lost their ranch in a rigged card game. That version of herself could never have imagined standing here, now having helped reshape the territory's future alongside a man her former self would have viewed with suspicion and distance. "Carter asked me to continue helping him in Washington," she said, revealing the offer she'd received earlier that day, as his territorial advisor on land and water matters. Hawke's expression revealed nothing, though his hand tightened slightly, around hers. "It's an important position. You'd be good at it." "I would," Eleanor agreed. "But my place is here. The work we've started in Copper Creek matters just as much as what happens in Washington." Relief flickered briefly in Hawke's eyes. "The Tribal Council has asked me to establish a permanent office in town, a place where Apache families can bring concerns without traveling to San Carlos or dealing with Indian agents. Between your office and the rancher's alliance headquarters, Copper Creek might become a model for the kind of cooperation the entire territory needs," Eleanor observed. "Something worth building. Something worth fighting for," Hawke added. The first stars appeared above the mountains as twilight deepened into evening. From the plaza below came sounds of continuing celebration, music, laughter, the voices of people who, for this moment at least, shared a common victory and purpose. "Montgomery was wrong about one thing," Eleanor said as they watched the festivities. "He called what we built a strange alliance, as though it were temporary or unnatural." "What would you call it?" Hawke asked. Eleanor turned to face him fully, years of shared struggles and triumphs reflected in her eyes. "The beginning." As the Arizona sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant copper and gold, Eleanor reflected on the strange journey that had begun with her father's. Desperate wager. A cruel land baron had indeed taken much from them, but in the struggle to reclaim what was rightfully theirs, she had found something far more valuable: her own strength, a community's unified purpose, and an ally who had become essential to her vision of the future. The challenges ahead remained substantial. Montgomery would regroup, find new ways to pursue his ambitions. The alliance they had built would face strains as individual interests occasionally conflicted with collective needs. The territory itself would continue evolving, sometimes in ways that threatened the values they fought to protect. But standing beside Daniel Hawke, watching their unlikely coalition celebrate a victory few would have thought possible months earlier, Eleanor Blackwood felt something she had almost forgotten during those dark days when her father gambled away their future. Not just hope, but certainty. Certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together, drawing strength from the connections they had forged across boundaries of background and birth. The final chapter of their story with Montgomery might be written, but the story of What they were building in its place was just beginning. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe. And turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.